The first thing you'll notice about movement 3 is that it changes into the key of F major. Now this gives it a different sonority and different sound, of course, from all the D minor keys, and you just need to be aware of that as far as where it's going to go and what it's going to sound like. It's in a 3/2 meter marking, which really tells us that it's got a nice flowing, moving, genteel kind of feel to it. Different than a 3/4, which has a little bit more rhythmic value. 3/2, we want to think about stretching the note values out quite a bit more. And you need to understand that composers really do have a different feeling in mind when they go from something like 3/2 to 3/4. It does make a difference. Now, the indication of the performer's instructions up here, andeggiando, ma non adagio. The ma non adagio is pretty easy. It means not too slow. We want to keep this moving. We want a nice flowing part. The andeggiando is really, it's a bowing technique. And so it doesn't really apply to it, us as far as saxophonists or wind players go. What it means is it's sort of a tremolo kind of feeling where there's an alternation between the strings. And so that's not really going to be possible for us, so we really cannot think about that as far as how we're going to perform this piece. The third movement is in 2 sections. And really when we see this 2-section form in a Baroque composition, we're really thinking about contrasts. And you can see that the melody at the beginning in section 1 is a little bit different than it is in section 2. The first one starts in major, F major, but the second you start to get the outline of a C minor chord, and it gives it a different tonality, different sonority. Now, what happens also typically in Baroque music is that our opening theme in measure 1 comes back at the very end, and that is the case here as well. If you look at about measure 29, you'll see that the opening melodic statement comes back. Here are the opening measures of movement 3, and I want you to just notice what happens at the very end of this in the form of a phrase extension. Notice here at the end on this phrase extension, we get a repetition of the final couple of measures. We get up to this F, and we notice that measure 3, measure 5 are exactly the same. It's a neat compositional device that Telemann also does in the next phrase. Now it's important just to try to make that to be as effective as possible. I think of it sort of like as an echo. The whole opening 4 measures, you've got a full phrase of music. It's forte, you get a nice crescendo at going into the resolution, but then you get this soft little echo effect coming through. And what you need to do then is just make sure that you're playing considerably softer than you did the first time. The musical goal for each section of movement 3 happens to be the C, and it's portrayed here in an octave. Now I think this is where that andeggiando comes back in, where we're going to play one on an open string and then the other on a stop string, which gives it a different timbral effect on a string instrument. This occurs in measure 12. We arrive at a C here, and then we get at measure 13 we get a repetition, just like we had in end of movement 2. We get it repeated. It could have ended anywhere before that, actually at measure 13, but we get an extension. So Telemann is really giving us a lot of these musical extensions. The C occurs as climactic point in the second section occurs at measure 25. I'll go ahead and begin this part at measure 9. Now you can hear that the C tends to stick out a little bit, but I really think that this is probably the intent of the composer, that you get a different timbral effect. Now you must be careful that you don't allow that high C going down to the lower octave C to pop out and be obnoxious or anything, but it's okay that it sounds different because that's the way it's written, that's what it's supposed to do. Technically in this movement there's probably one new element or technique that you might not be aware of, and that's when we get to a trill on a B flat. And this occurs in measure 4. And then it's repeated again back in measure 6. Now, we don't want to do our flip-flopping action. Okay? We could go with our bis B flat, and if you're not aware of bis B flat, it's the first finger with a B and the small key underneath. That's the bis key to get us B flat. But we have to use that bis key here in conjunction with our side C. Now, tonally, it's not exactly in tune, but once again, as a trill fingering, that doesn't matter. We can move right on through it. But here's the technique once again for that trill finger. Make sure you're moving just your finger, not your arm. It gets to be a bit wobbly. Now we don't have a whole lot of time to do the trill here, so we don't need to worry too much about that, but remember to keep the rhythmic integrity of the trill going.